From the Fantasy Formula One podcast, I'm Paul, and today we are going over the rules for the 2025 Fantasy Formula One season. If you've already played Fantasy Formula One, then all you really want to pay attention to is this first little bit where we go over what's new and what's changed. Everything else will be review. But I really enjoy every year still looking over the rules, reading them all, and making sure I'm not missing anything. And so what's new for F1 Fantasy Formula One this year? Transfers. I'm going to read it verbatim and then we'll discuss it. If your driver competes in the sprint but is replaced before the Grand Prix qualifying, you'll get a transfer suggestion so you can avoid not classified penalties, which is 20 points. This suggestion still comes out of your transfer limit and is still a negative 10-point penalty. Okay, cool. So basically it'll ping you. It'll let you know if one of your people that raced in the sprint is not going to be in the Grand Prix, which is really nice of them, because otherwise, especially on the weekends when everything is a little closer time-wise, you would have people get crashed out or not be able to compete, and you just wouldn't know unless you were actively watching it. You still have to use a chip to not take that negative 10-point penalty, and it's not free, but it's better than not having your driver drive and taking the negative 20-point penalty. Pit stops. This is cool. Every team will now get points for pit stops during the Grand Prix, but not sprints, because there are no pit stops in sprints. The number of points each team gets will be based on the fastest pit stop, okay? A 5-point bonus will go to constructors who recorded the fastest pit stop and or set a new world record, and they'll get 15 points. That's nice of them. And we'll get into the points they give here in a little bit. But general broad brushstrokes for this pit stop rule, did the numbers on last year, how many points would have been allocated and things like that. And roughly half to 2/3 of every driver turned in a time that would have gotten them a bonus point. It's fair enough to say that half to 2/3 of the constructors will get bonus points from this. So this increases the value of the constructors. Disqualification penalties. Penalty points for being disqualified will now be applied to the constructor instead of the driver themselves. That's good. Disqualified drivers will not gain any points for the session they were disqualified from. So with the rules of the Fantasy Formula One game, the constructor absorbs the points from the drivers. So if both your drivers get 25 points, your constructor gets 50 points. And there's a little bonuses sprinkled in for the constructors as well. But you would end up getting double dipped with any sort of penalty. If your driver got a DNF, then it would be negative 20 for your driver, negative 20 for your constructor. And specifically last year, when I think it was George Russell got disqualified after the race, maybe it was Lewis Hamilton. When one of them got disqualified after the race, they went from having a very dominant race and getting was going to be 50, 60, 70, some awful amount of points if you put your 3X on them, to getting negative 25 points for disqualification times 2 because of your constructor. And it was a huge 150 point swing. The driver's score will just drop to 0 for that event, and the constructor will get negative 20 points, which I think is great. It helps make it so that a disqualification, especially one that wasn't the driver's fault, doesn't just completely screw over your fantasy team. So that's the end of the new stuff. So you can go ahead and quit listening if you've played Fantasy F1 before and you know the rules from last year, because everything else going forward from here will just be a review.